If someone had told me that the person I'd fall in love with would be the harsh critic who once tore my album apart, I would have never believed them. The music world could be brutal, and Sloane was known as the toughest, most feared reviewer of them all. She didn't write reviews, she conducted autopsies. Her byline, in the Crescendo, the industry's most feared and most read publication, was a thing of dread. To have Sloane Mercer to review your work was to invite a surgical strike on your very soul, delivered in prose so lethally elegant it could leave a scar you'd admire even as you bled. She was a woman carved from ice and ink. Her appearance was a deliberate extension of her brand, a sharp, severe bob of espresso brown hair that framed a face rarely troubled by a smile. Her wardrobe was a monochrome arsenal of tailored black trousers, crisp white shirts, and blazers with angles sharp enough to cut. She favored a specific, expensive brand of black ink for her fountain pen, claiming the impermanence of digital text lacked the finality she demanded. Her apartment, a minimalist penthouse overlooking the city, was a temple to silence and order, a direct rebuke to the chaotic noise she so often eviscerated. The album had been on her desk for a week. Avalanche by Lyra. The packaging was predictably ethereal, a misty soft focus photo of the blonde songstress looking wistfully into the middle distance. Sloane's lip had curled upon receiving it. Lyra was everything Sloane despised, a product of pure sentiment. A superstar built on a foundation of heartbreak anthems and soaring saccharine ballads that sold by the millions. She was the artist for people who wanted to feel deep without actually plumbing any depths. For 3 days, Sloane had let the album linger, a patient predator, allowing the anticipation to build. She knew her editor was sweating. The public was hungry for a take. Finally, late on a Tuesday night, the city lights twinkling like fallen stars below her, she poured a single finger of PY Scotch, slid the CD into her high-fidelity system, the only indulgence of warmth in the room, and pressed play. What poured from the speakers was Sloane's finely tuned ear, exactly what she expected. Wistful piano melodies, layers of echo-drenched vocals, lyrics about shattered hearts and lonely nights. It was impeccably produced, of course. Lyra's team was the best money could buy, but to Sloane, it was all hollow craftsmanship. It was sadness as a marketable commodity. But then something shifted. By the 4th track, a sparse, haunting piece titled Fathoms, Sloane's pen, which had been poised to scribble dismissive notes, stilled. The production stripped away to almost nothing, leaving just Lyra's voice, raw and trembling over a single aching cello line. The lyrics weren't the usual vague platitudes. They were specific, visceral, a detailed map of a particular kind of grief. It was unsettling. Sloane took a sharp sip of scotch. The burn a welcome anchor. She listened to the entire album twice more. The initial wave of cynical judgment was, to her annoyance, interrupted by moments of genuine, unvarnished emotion that slipped through her defenses. It felt less like an album and more like a confession, and Sloane hated nothing more than being made to feel like an unwilling confessor. This vulnerability was an attack. It was messy. It was real, and it threatened the pristine, controlled walls of her world. That was the hook. That was the angle. The review wasn't just going to be a pan. It was going to be an extermination. She would weaponize the album's one strength, its raw vulnerability, and frame it as its greatest weakness. She worked through the night, her fountain pen scratching across a legal pad with cold fury. She didn't just criticize, she pathized. She didn't just analyze the music. She diagnosed the artist. The resulting piece was a masterpiece of vitriol. The opening line was a shot across the bow. Lyra's new album, Avalanche, is aptly named, for it is less a collection of songs and more a natural disaster of sentiment, a crushing slide of emotional debris that buries any hint of melody or meaning beneath its weight. She eviscerated the production, calling it a sonic duvet designed to smother any potentially interesting musical idea. in a suffocating embrace of reverb. She mocked the lyrics as the diary entries of a woman who has mistaken melancholy for a personality trait. But the killing blow, the line that would be quoted for weeks, was her conclusion. This is not an album to be enjoyed. It is a pathology to be studied. Lyra Vale doesn't want to share her pain. She wants to franchise it. She isn't offering a shoulder to cry on. She is manufacturing an avalanche of depression disguised as music. A meticulously engineered cataclysm designed to make sure that if she must drown in sadness, she wants everyone else held underwater with her. It is a bleak, narcissistic, and ultimately tedious listening experience. She sent the file to her editor at 4:17 a.m. The reply landed in under 3 minutes. My God, Sloane. They're going to riot. It's perfect. And riot they did. The piece went live at 9 a.m. and by 9:15 the internet was blazing. Fury surged in from Lyra's army of loyal devotees. #Sloane is over party was trending by noon, and think pieces were already being assembled about the ethics of critique and the misogyny of tearing down successful women. Music writers picked sides, some denouncing Sloane's brutality, others praising her for having the nerve to say what they were all thinking. Sloane spent the day tracking the fallout from her hushed, orderly apartment, a second cup of black coffee cooling beside her. She watched the digital tempest with a cool sense of satisfaction. This was her element. This was her arena, and stage was her charge. The chime of alerts, the breathless headlines, the raging tweets. It was all just white noise, the predictable echo of a flawlessly thrown stone. She told herself she was unshaken. She told herself the odd lingering disquiet she felt was merely professional fatigue. She told herself that the ghost of that cello line from Fathoms meant nothing. It was just a well-executed minor chord, a trick of the trade. It certainly hadn't gotten under her skin. Sloane, the consummate critic, was so busy deconstructing everyone else that she failed to perform a proper autopsy on her own reaction. She was, as she told herself, perfectly, gloriously unshaken, truly, completely unshaken. It was the most convincing performance of her career. Part 2. The pop star strikes back. The review arrived like a poison-tipped arrow, striking its mark with unerring accuracy. Lyra's world was a curated bubble of adoration, a gilded cage lined with platinum plaques, and the constant humming praise of her team. She was ensconced in a 5-star hotel suite, a sprawling landscape of white orchids, silk pillows, and the faint sweet haze of her own perfume. The morning of the album's release was meant to be a victory lap. Instead, her publicist, a perpetually anxious man named Jonah Reed, stepped in holding a tablet as if it were a live grenade. You should probably see this, he said, his voice tight. It's from the crescendo. It's Sloane. The name alone sent a peculiar chill through the room. Everyone in the industry knew Sloane. Lyra Vale took the tablet, her perfectly manicured fingers leaving faint smudges on the glass. She read it once, quickly. The sentences were a blur of crisp black violence, avalanche of depression, franchised pain held underwater. The first impact was physical. A hot flush of embarrassment climbed her neck, followed by a cold, sinking pocket in her gut. It was the feeling of being publicly flayed. Every inch of her artistic soul laid bare and mocked. Jonah Reed was already speaking. A rush of damage control. We don't respond. We absolutely don't respond. We pushed the statement about being proud of the art and respecting all critical opinions. Her read is an outlier. The sales numbers are incredible. The fan response is, leave, Lyra Vale said, her voice softer than she intended. Lyra, we need to please. I just want to read it alone. When the door clicked shut, she read it again. Slowly, deliberately. She absorbed each cutting clause, each elegantly aimed insult. She felt the sting of every word, 1,000 tiny paper cuts on her ego. She had worked on Avalanche for 2 years. It was her most personal work, written in the raw aftermath of a loss so profound she could still feel its ghost in her bones. She had laid her nerves on the studio floor, and Sloane had not only stepped on them, but had written a thesis on the inadequacy of their composition. Tears rose, hot and humiliating. She let one fall, a single drop of salt water on the tablet's screen, smearing the word narcissistic. Then she read it a third time, and something unusual happened. The pain, the humiliation, began to transmute. Beneath the viciousness, she started to notice something else, a frightening, almost intimate degree of engagement. Sloane hadn't simply dismissed the record. She had listened to it. Really listened. She had heard the vulnerability in fathoms. She had sensed the raw nerve, and her answer had been to attack it with the precision of a surgeon cutting out a tumor. This wasn't a lazy pan. It was obsessive dissection. She wants everyone else held underwater with her. The line was cruel, yes, but it was also a specific interpretation. It implied an intent, a wish for communion in misery. Sloane hadn't just heard sadness. She'd heard a demand, and that was fascinating. Lyra Vale spent the day in a strange suspended state. She did her interviews, smiled at the cameras, and thanked her fans for their love. All the while, Sloane's review reverberated in her head, a dark, critical counterpoint to the symphony of praise. Her team shielded her from the worst of the online fury, but she caught glimpses of the war raging in her name. #Sloane is over party. The fiery defenses from her fans, the heated debates among critics. It was chaos, and at the center of the storm was this one woman, this ice-cold critic who had single-handedly defined the conversation. That night, alone in the vast silent suite, Lyra Vale found herself on Sloane's author page at the crescendo. She read other reviews. She saw the pattern, the surgical precision, the cold intellect, the utter lack of mercy. Sloane's writing was a fortress, impenetrable and austere. There was no joy in it, only judgment. A thought sharp and clear, cut through her self-pity. She lives in a world without music, only critique, and another thought more dangerous I got to her. It was the only explanation for the review's peculiar venom. Something in the album's vulnerability had breached Sloane's defenses, and her response was a violent, overcompensating counterattack. The critic who claimed to be unmoved had, in fact, been moved to rage. A slow smile touched Lyra's lips for the first time that day. The hurt was still there, a dull ache, but it was now overshadowed by a spark of pure, defiant challenge. Sloane had tried to bury her album under an avalanche of words. Lyra Vale would respond not with a shovel, but with a feather. She picked up her phone, her personal account, the one she operated herself. The cursor blinked in the tweet box. Her team would have an aneurysm. Jonah Reed would probably faint. She crafted her words with the care she usually reserved for a song's bridge. It had to be perfect. It had to be clever. It had to reframe the entire narrative, transforming her from a victim of a critic's cruelty into a pop star, so potent she could disrupt the equilibrium of even the coldest heart. She typed, "Guess my album started thawing the cold-hearted reviewer's heart." And she didn't like that. Snowflake #broken art. She added a link to Sloane's review, giving the critic the traffic, the engagement, the attention she so clearly craved. It was a masterstroke of benevolent malice. She hit tweet before she could second-guess it. The response was instantaneous and volcanic. Her notifications exploded. Within minutes, her fans who had been raging helplessly seized the new narrative with gleeful fervor. #Thoring Sloane began to trend alongside #avalanche. The meme was born. Pictures of a grumper-looking Sloane photoshopped next to melting ice cubes. The conversation shifted from "how dare she" to "Lyra Vale is a queen of clapbacks." Lyra Vale watched it unfold, a satisfying warmth replacing the cold knot in her stomach. It was a victory. She had reclaimed the narrative. But hours later, long after the chaos had begun to subside, she found herself in bed staring at the ceiling. The hotel room was silent again. The cleverness of her tweet faded, and she was left with the lingering echo of Sloane's words. Cold-hearted. The phrase echoed. Who was this woman who wielded words like weapons? What kind of person built a fortress around themselves so high that the sound of a heartfelt cello was seen as an act of war? For the first time, Lyra's curiosity about her work was eclipsed by a deeper, more personal curiosity about the critic herself. She had thrown a stone back at the fortress, and instead of hearing it clatter against the wall, she had heard the faint, distant echo of something hollow within. And for the first time in her career, miles away in her minimalist apartment, Sloane, the unflappable, the impenetrable Sloane, found herself staring at the same ceiling, unable to sleep, because the pop star's tweet, a throwaway line to millions, felt to her like a direct hit, a diagnosis. And it was 100% infuriatingly, terrifyingly accurate. Part 3. The first encounter for Sloane. The Quiet Knife was more than a restaurant. It was a secular chapel, a sanctuary carved out of the city's relentless noise. Tucked down a cobblestone alley, it enforced a strict no-phones policy, its lighting perpetually set to the soft golden hour of dusk. The patrons, a curated collection of writers, academics, and hermits, spoke in hushed tones, if they spoke at all. The clink of cutlery on ceramic was the loudest sound, a punctuation mark in the comfortable silence. This was where Sloane came to recalibrate, to shed the grime of the industry she so deftly dissected. Here, she was not a critic. She was simply a woman enjoying a perfectly seared scallop in peace. Her ritual was sacrosanct. Every Thursday, 8 p.m. corner table, back to the wall, facing the door, a habit born of professional paranoia. She would order the same bottle of mineral water, the same grilled octopus salad, and lose herself in a book, the physical weight of it, a comfort against the ephemeral digital world she inhabited. This Thursday was no different. The reviews' aftershocks were still rumbling through the industry. But here, within these warm, silent walls, they were a distant tremor. She was engrossed in a dense biography, a fork full of arugula halfway to her lips. When the door opened, breaking the restaurant's still atmosphere, a woman entered, swaddled in an oversized cashmere coat, a beanie pulled low over blonde hair, large sunglasses obscuring most of her face despite the evening gloom. An outlier, the hostess, a woman who valued the establishment's ethos as much as Sloane did, looked mildly alarmed. Sloane glanced up, irritation flaring. A tourist, an influencer, hoping to discover some hidden gem. She willed the hostess to turn the woman away to preserve the sanctity. But the woman spoke quietly to the hostess, gesturing with a gloved hand. After a moment, the hostess, looking slightly confused, nodded and pointed toward the back, toward the restrooms, right past Sloane's table. Sloane ducked her head back into her book. Emitting a silent wave of do not engage, she heard the soft footfalls approach, felt a presence slow near her table. She refused to look up, her knuckles tightening around her fork. Keep walking, she mentally commanded. Your bathroom is that way. Leave me to my peace and my prose. The footsteps stopped. The presence didn't move on. Sloane's jaw tightened. She could smell a faint, devastatingly expensive perfume, jasmine, and vanilla, and something utterly unique, cutting through the aroma of brown butter and thyme. It was entirely at odds with the restaurant's aesthetic. This isn't a zoo exhibit, Sloane said, her voice low and sharp, her eyes still locked on her page. The tables are for paying customers who appreciate silence. A soft, musical laugh answered her. It was a laugh she'd heard 1,000 times, auto-tuned and leered over synth tracks. It was utterly different in person, warmer, real. I was just admiring the view, a voice replied. And it was that voice, the one from the album, smooth as honey, and just as capable of sticking to everything. A critic in her natural habitat. So severe, so focused. It's even more intimidating in person. Sloane's head snapped up. The woman had pushed the sunglasses onto her head, revealing eyes the color of summer sky, crinkled at the corners with unmistakable amusement. Lyra Vale, in person, in her restaurant. For a terrifying instant, Sloane's carefully engineered poise cracked, her mind short-circuited, caught between professional disdain, private fury, and a sudden, unwelcome jolt of pure physical awe. The images and music videos hadn't done her justice. They caught the beauty but missed the vitality, the audacious life that seemed to pour off her. She was stunning, and the realization enraged Sloane even more. She recovered quickly, her face settling into a mask of pure, unfiltered irritation. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, scanning the room to make sure they weren't creating a scene. The other diners, mercifully, were still lost in their own worlds. A couple murmured over oysters, a server drifted past with champagne. Candles guttered softly in their glasses. No one looked up or cared. "Oh, I heard this was the spot for a good, quiet meal," Lyra Vale said, her tone impossibly airy. "And, for spotting rare, elusive creatures in the wild." Her gaze skimmed Sloane's book, her half-eaten salad, her minimalist clothes. "The aesthetic is very you. All sharp edges. No comfort. I suppose that tracks. Get to your point or get to your bathroom," Sloane muttered, lifting a fork as if to resume eating. A blatant dismissal. Some of us are trying to enjoy an evening without a pop star interruption. Instead of bristling, Lyra's smile widened. She moved with shocking lack of self-consciousness, catching the back of the empty chair at Sloane's table and dragging it across the floor with a thin scrape that made Sloane wince. She sat, not across from her, but right beside her, cornering her, pulling her into orbit. Sloane finally looked directly at her, and the nearness hit like a physical shock. She could see the faint dusting of freckles over Lyra Vale's nose, the slight coal smear beneath her eyes, the perfect bow of her mouth. She was so close Sloane could feel the heat of her skin. The scent of her perfume had become an intimate embrace. Sloane's breath snagged. She nearly did drop her fork. "What do you think you're doing?" Sloane's voice came as a strained whisper, all her usual authority gone, replaced by flustered confusion. Lyra Vale leaned in, her voice dipping to a conspiratorial murmur meant only for Sloane. The rest of the room blurred. "I read your review," she said, eyes dancing. "Every word. I must have read it a dozen times. It's really all I can think about." Sloane found her footing, the familiar ground of critique. "I'm sure it is. It's not every day someone properly articulates the failures of your life's work. It must be educational." Lyra Vale ignored the barb. She tilted her head, her gaze flicking to Sloane's lips for a heartbeat before returning to her eyes. "All that fire, all that passion. You didn't just listen. You felt. You got so angry." She leaned in another inch, closing the already minimal distance between them. Her voice was a whisper, a secret shared in the dark. "So, you really loved my album?" The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking reversal of her entire thesis. Sloane sputtered. "It's awful. It's sentimental, manipulative trash. I said as much." Lyra Vale just laughed, a low, throaty sound that did something peculiar to Sloane's equilibrium. "You can keep saying that, but we both know the truth." She reached out and, for a heart-stopping moment, Sloane thought she would touch her face. Instead, she simply straightened the salt shaker, her fingers graceful and sure. "Maybe it's just thawing your heart, and I'm here to speed up the process." She said it like a promise, a threat, a seduction. Before Sloane could form a coherent reply, Lyra Vale began to stand, but paused, leaning in one final time. Her lips came so close to Sloane's ear that her breath ghosted warm over her skin. Sloane went rigid, every nerve-ending screaming. Then, with a confidence that left Sloane utterly frozen, Lyra Vale pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her cheek. It was shockingly intimate, a brand of warmth in the cool, controlled air of the quiet knife. See you round, critic, Lyra Vale whispered, her lips brushing Sloane's skin with the words. And then she was gone, threading back through the tables, tugging her beanie down as she slipped out into the evening, leaving nothing but the fading scent of jasmine and vanilla, and the roaring, thunderous hush of her absence. Sloane sat perfectly still, the page of her book blurred into meaningless lines. Her cheek burned where Lyra's lips had been. She could feel the imprint, a tattoo of audacity. She slowly, shakily raised her fingers to touch the spot. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a wild, frantic rhythm completely at odds with the restaurant's serene pace. It was a drumbeat of pure, unadulterated chaos. And for the first time in her meticulously ordered life, Sloane had absolutely no idea what to do next. Part 4. Flirty Intrusions. The following week became a masterclass in psychological warfare, and Sloane was a captive audience of one. Her carefully ordered world systematically dismantled by a sun-kissed grenade. In designer jeans, Lyra's tweet had been a declaration of war, but these accidental run-ins were the invasion, and she was a brilliant tactician. She never appeared where Sloane might expect a pop star. No glitzy galas, no industry parties. Instead, she infiltrated the sacred spaces of Sloane's solitude, the places where her guard was lowest, her persona most relaxed. It began 2 days after The Quiet Knife. Sloane was in her favorite bookstore, a dusty labyrinthine place that smelled of old paper and binding glue. She was in the critical theory section, searching for a specific, obscure text, her fingers tracing the spines with a scholar's reverence. The aisle was narrow, silent, and blessedly empty. A presence materialized beside her. She didn't need to look. The scent of jasmine and vanilla announced her like a fanfare. Adorno, Lyra's voice murmured. Close enough to stir the hair by Sloane's ear. A little light reading for a Thursday afternoon, or just reinforcing the walls. Sloane stiffened, refusing to grant her the satisfaction of a jump. She pulled the book from the shelf with a practiced calm she did not feel. Some of us enjoy intellectual rigor, a concept I'm sure your songwriting team is familiar with in only the most abstract sense. Lyra Vale laughed, a soft, genuine sound that seemed to warm the dusty air. She plucked a different book from the shelf, a dense-looking volume on post-structuralism. Ouch. You assume I don't read. That's a critical error. She flipped through a few pages with a surprisingly knowledgeable air. Though I prefer my despair with a melody, personally, it's more digestible. Your album was plenty despairing, Sloane retorted, finally turning to face her. Lyra Vale was dressed down again, jeans, a simple black sweater, her hair in a messy bun. She looked infuriatingly normal and breathtakingly beautiful. It was the lack of intellectual heft that was the problem. Lyra Vale hummed, replacing the book and stepping closer, forcing Sloane to tilt her head up slightly to maintain eye contact. The aisle was so narrow their arms were almost touching. Or maybe you just didn't like the way it made you feel. All that feeling. Her eyes dropped to Sloane's lips for a fraction of a second. It must be so exhausting living in that head of yours. All the time. All that analysis. Don't you ever just want to feel something? Sloane's breath caught. The question was a direct hit. A sniper's bullet aimed at the core of her being. I feel plenty, she said, her voice colder than intended. Annoyance. For instance, in vast quantities. Lyra's smile was a slow, wicked curve. I can work with annoyance. It's a spark. And I'm very good with fire. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper that was for Sloane alone. One day I'll make you beg to sing for you in bed just for you, and you'll forget every single clever word you've ever written. The image, vivid, shocking, and intensely private, exploded in Sloane's mind. Her cheeks flushed a traitorous scolding red. She opened her mouth to deliver a scathing retort. But nothing came out. No words, just a static hum of pure, undiluted shock. Lyra's grin was triumphant. She reached out and with a feather-like touch straightened the collar of Sloane's shirt. her fingers brushing against the sensitive skin of her neck. The contact was electric. "See you soon, critic." She was gone, disappearing around a bookshelf like a phantom. Sloane stood there for a full minute, the Adorno book clutched like a lifeline in her trembling hands, her heart performing a frantic, irregular drum solo against her ribs. The intrusions continued with a regularity that felt both random and meticulously planned. At her usual coffee shop, where she went for a precise 7-minute espresso shot and to read the paper in peace, Lyra Vale was suddenly in line behind her, ordering an absurdly complicated syrupy concoction. "Shouldn't you be sipping kale juice through a diamond-encrusted straw somewhere?" Sloane had grumbled, not turning around. "Shouldn't you be sucking the joy out of a room from a safer distance?" Lyra Vale shot back effortlessly. When Sloane turned, Lyra Vale winked. "You're off your game. I'm starting to think you like these little chats." The barista called Sloane's name. As she reached for her simple espresso, Lyra Vale's hand covered hers on the counter. Warm and steady. Sloane froze. "Your pulse is racing," Lyra Vale murmured, her thumb pressing gently against the frantic beat in Sloane's wrist. "Is it the caffeine? Or is it me?" The most brazen intrusion came on a rainy Tuesday. Sloane was in the lobby of her own office building, waiting for the elevator, mentally drafting a particularly vicious takedown of a Neopoke band. The air was thick with the smell of wet wool and frustration. A sleek black town car pulled up to the curb. The rear window slid down. There was Lyra Vale Sansa's disguise smiling at her from the dry, plush interior. She made a little "come here" gesture with her finger. Against every instinct of self-preservation, Sloane found herself walking to the car, her umbrella held tight. "You're stalking me now," Sloane said, leaning down to the window. "This is bordering on pathological." "You're the one who came to my window," Lyra Vale pointed out, her eyes sparkling. "I just wanted to see the place where all the magic happens. The torture chamber where you dissect art for a living." She looked past Sloane at the bland corporate lobby. "It's beige. I expected more dramatic lighting." "What do you want, Lyra Vale?" Sloane asked, exasperated, rain dripping from her umbrella onto the pristine pavement. Lyra's expression softened into something that looked almost genuine. "I was in the neighborhood. I thought of you. I wondered if you'd finally admitted to yourself that you're obsessed with me." "I'm not," Sloane insisted, the lie feeling weak even to her own ears. "Liar," Lyra Vale whispered, her voice warm and intimate through the open window. "You think about my album. You think about my words. You definitely thought about me singing in your bed." She held Sloane's gaze, a challenge and a promise. The elevator dinged behind Sloane. "Your chariot awaits. Don't work too hard crafting ways to break other people's hearts. Save some of that passion for me." The window slid up, and the car pulled smoothly away, leaving Sloane standing in the rain, her mind a whirlwind. She was losing, and the terrifying part was she no longer wanted to win. The flustered anger was morphing into a breathless, addictive anticipation. She caught herself scanning crowds for a glimpse of blonde hair, her heart leaping at the scent of jasmine in a passing crowd. She'd be reading a book and find herself rereading the same paragraph, her mind conjuring the memory of a whispered threat that sounded like a vow. She, Sloane the untouchable, was developing a craving. She pretended to roll her eyes. She composed ever sharper comebacks in her head, yet the truth was a secret she kept even from herself. Her pulse now sped not with irritation, but with hope. Each time the world tilted, and Lyra Vale stepped in, the critic, who built her citadel on a base of cool, unassailable reason, was now hopelessly, dangerously hooked on the blaze of the pop star's fire. Part 5. Infatuation. The change wasn't some thunderous blast, but a quiet, tectonic shift of Sloane's inner landscape. It behaved like a virus, and Lyra Vale was patient zero, the carrier of contagion. The signs were subtle at first, easy to wave off as professional curiosity or mere vexation. It began with silence, The intervals between Lyra's incursions, once havens of clean, undisturbed thought, now rang hollow. Sloane would sit in her favored chair at the quiet knife, book open on her lap, and catch herself staring at the empty chair at her side. The space seemed to keep a ghost print, a lingering warmth, and the softest afterscent of jasmine. The hush, once her cherished companion, now felt like an absence. It was waiting, and she was waiting with it. She noticed things small, devastating particulars that her critic's mind, trained for observation, logged against her will. She registered the specific cadence of Lyra's laugh, not the polished, stage-ready version, but the real, unguarded snort that sometimes broke free when Sloane landed a truly cutting line. It was elegant and absolutely captivating. She clocked the way Lyra's eyes, the color of a sun-soaked ocean, would crease at the corners, not only when she smiled, but when she was listening closely, as if she were mentally saving every syllable. Sloane uttered. She registered the warmth of her touch. It was never lingering or improper, just brief. Electric contacts, a hand on her arm to underline a point, a finger grazing hers as she offered a coffee she'd just happened to buy an extra of. Each contact felt like a brand, a tiny sunspot, burning through layers of black wool and intellectual armor. The banter went on, keen and double-edged, but its character was shifting. The jabs shed their toxin and took on a flirtatious, almost ritual weight. "You're insufferable," Sloane would mutter when Lyra Vale caught her eyeing artisanal cheeses at a farmer's market she almost never attended. "And you're predictable," Lyra Vale returned, leaning to inspect a wheel of aged Gouda. "All sharp, hard surfaces. But I'd wager there's something complex and delicious beneath if someone knows how to look." She'd glance at Sloane, then let her gaze sharpen. "I'm an excellent connoisseur." Sloane flushed, turning back to the cheese. "Your metaphors are as clumsy as your chord progressions." "You remember my chord progressions, Lyra." Vale's voice was a purr of triumph. "I'm flattered." The most disarming moments, however, came when Lyra Vale dropped the teasing entirely. One afternoon they were in a park, perched on a bench above a frozen pond. The encounter had begun with their usual tension, but settled into a strange, familiar quiet. "Why do you do it?" Lyra Vale asked, her voice soft, sincere. She wasn't looking at Sloane, but at the gray sky. "The viciousness. You're clearly brilliant. You could simply critique the work. Why make it personal? Why tear down the person who made it?" It was the first time anyone had asked her that without accusation, with what sounded like true curiosity. Sloane, who always kept a polished, cynical answer ready for any interviewer, found herself pausing. "Art isn't made in a vacuum," she said at last, her own voice softer than usual. "It's an extension of the maker's ego. To critique the work without naming the ego that produced it is dishonest. It's a handshake where no one tells the truth." Lyra Vale weighed this, nodding slowly. "So, you see yourself as what? A truth teller?" "I see myself as a necessary counterweight to the unexamined celebration of mediocrity," Sloane answered, though the words sounded rehearsed even to her. Lyra Vale turned to face her, the focus of her gaze so directed. "Unnerved. Or maybe you're proving that if you can't make something beautiful, you can at least master the craft of tearing it down." The line should have stung like a slap. Instead, it felt like a key turning in a deep lock inside her. It was the same terrifying acuity that had powered her tweet. Lyra Vale read the fortress not as an unbreachable monument, but as a structure, assembled from specific, legible materials, insecurity, intellect, and a profound terror of being seen. Sloane had no comeback. She simply looked away, throat tight. Lyra Vale, sensing she'd hit a nerve, didn't press. Instead, she nudged her shoulder against Sloane's. "Hey, I'm just critiquing the critic. Respect the craft." And Sloane, to her own astonishment, let out a shaky laugh. The tension eased. They sat in silence again, and this time it felt different. The air between them carried a charged calm. Like frost before dawn, fragile, tentative, and magnificently unbearable to name. For now, anyway, it was a shared silence. That was the moment Sloane knew she was in trouble. The line between rivalry and something else had not just blurred. It had been completely erased. She wasn't just addicted to the adrenaline of their encounters. She was starting to crave the person within them. She tried to fight it. She'd go home and list Lyra's faults in her journal like a mantra. Attention-seeking, dramatic, over-emotional, a capitalist construct of femininity. But her mind would betray her, countering each point. Confident, passionate, genuine, unapologetically herself. She caught herself one evening standing in her minimalist closet, her hand hovering over her rack of identical black shirts. She wondered briefly, absurdly, if Lyra Vale would like her in a color. The thought was so alien. It felt like a hallucination. The final surrender was the most damning. She began to alter her routines, not to avoid Lyra Vale, but to increase the chances of their meetings. She lingered longer at the bookstore. She took the scenic route past the recording studios she knew Lyra Vale frequented. She found herself waiting at her favorite spots, a book open but unread in her lap, her senses on high alert for a specific laugh, a familiar scent, a flash of blonde hair. She was no longer just looking forward to the interruptions. She was actively, desperately hoping for them. The reviewer, who had built her entire identity on a foundation of unassailable, cold judgment, was now undeniably and terrifyingly infatuated. Part 6. The absence. The first day was a relief, a return to normality. Sloane told herself this, her voice a stern, internal lecture. As she sat at her desk at the crescendo, the air in her office felt clearer. The city's noise outside her window, a predictable white noise, not a potential prelude to an interruption. She could finally concentrate. She attacked a piece on a new post-punk band with a ferocity that had her editor sending her a congratulatory email. The old Sloane is back. All sharp edges and no mercy. She worked through lunch at her desk. The silence of bomb. No one burst in with a ridiculous coffee order or a shamelessly flirtatious remark. No scent of jasmine lingered in the air to distract her. It was perfect. By the evening, the silence in her apartment had grown heavier, more pronounced. It was no longer peaceful. It was empty. She played music, something complex, and a tonal she'd normally relished deconstructing. Tonight, it just sounded like noise. She turned it off. The silence rushed back in, a physical presence in the room. She found herself jumping at the hum of the refrigerator, her heart giving a foolish, hopeful lurch each time, a conditioned response to the possibility of disruption that never came. The second day, the irritation set in. It was a low-grade, persistent hum beneath her skin. She was snappish with her assistant, dismissive in a meeting, her critiques of the post-punk band becoming needlessly cruel even for her. Her editor raised an eyebrow. "Everything all right, Sloane? You seem tense." "I'm perfectly fine," she bit out, the lie tasting acidic. "The work is just subpar. It's tedious to have to constantly point it out." She went to the quiet knife for her ritual. She ordered her usual. She opened her book and she stared at the same paragraph for 20 minutes, the words swimming meaninglessly on the page. The chair opposite her remained obstinately, glaringly empty. The restaurant's cherished silence felt like a mockery. She realized with a jolt of horror that she was listening for the scrape of a chair being dragged across the floor. She was waiting for a voice that would never come. She left her meal half-finished. At first, the third day was a special kind of agony. The irritation had burned away, leaving behind a raw, restless ache she couldn't locate or name. Her apartment, her sanctuary, felt like a gilded cage. She paced the polished concrete floors. Her own thoughts are frantic, circular trap. "This is absurd," she told herself. "You are Sloane. You are defined by your independence, your self-containment. You do not miss people. You tolerate them. But her body betrayed her. Her fingers itched to pick up her phone. For what? To text her. To what end? Just checking to see if you're still capable of being professionally annoying. The desperation of the thought made her nauseous. She tried to work and found herself scrolling through social media instead. Not on her professional account, but on a private anonymous one. She typed Lyra's name into the search bar. The results flooded in. Pictures from a runway show in Milan, a red carpet event in London, a charity gala in Paris. Lyra Vale was everywhere, dazzling and untouchable, surrounded by beautiful people. Her smile brilliant and perfectly practiced. She looked like a superstar. For part 2, subscribe to our channel and ring the bell.